Welcome back, everyone. This is the fifth in a series of presentations on Microsoft Entra ID Governance. In earlier sessions, we talked about the provisioning and deprovisioning features. Then we talked about entitlement management, access reviews. Last time we talked about lifecycle workflows. Today I'm going to talk about privileged identity management. To get started, this eye chart kind of is a high-level view of the features that Entra ID brings. These text boxes, and I'm going to zoom in on them, these are from Gartner. So the Gartner definition of identity and access management is that top paragraph. Fairly simple. Gartner breaks the market into three major categories. There are products that handle identity governance and administration. Gartner calls that IGA. There are products that handle access management. Gartner calls that AM. A third topic is privileged identity management. Gartner calls that PAM. And these definitions and the links are off to Gartner's public website where they rate products, or they have people in the world are able to contribute their product ratings across these different categories. When we look at identity governance and administration, some of the main products in that category are things like SailPoint and Saviynt and Oracle and NetIQ. And Entra ID participates in that category. And in fact, the Entra ID governance features are largely focused in that identity governance and administration category. The product topic category of access management, typically we think of things like Okta and Ping and ForgeRock. These are products or technologies that impact the access control at the moment when a user is actually using a resource. So that's different than a tool like SailPoint or Saviynt, where those products are not involved in the actual runtime decision of should this access to a resource take place. The third category, privileged identity management, that typically is confined to highly privileged activity. And products like CyberArk and BeyondTrust are typically what we think of in that category. So in the past, most of the products in these three categories focused only on that category. And that's what's different about Microsoft's Entra ID. It's an IAM product, and it offers features and capabilities in all three of these market categories. So we've got provisioning and deprovisioning, and we've got access reviews and request approvals. That's part of identity governance. We've got access management, and in the Entra ID world, that's an application registration and doing SAML or OIDC single sign-on. But most significantly in access management, it's a set of features around conditional access policies that allow us to control whether or not a user in a certain circumstance is going to be allowed access to a resource. And by using one product stack, one platform to manage both the governance aspects of access management and the runtime aspects of access management, everything gets easier. These are just, in the Entra system, these are just properties of an application. Provisioning becomes a configuration option on an app registration. An access review becomes just configuration that's part of an access package that points at an application registration. So today I wanted to talk about privileged identity management, and what's novel here is that the Entra ID feature set takes these fundamental capabilities that are involved in identity governance and access management and extends them to the realm of privileged identity management. CyberArk, Beyond Trust, other products in that category, their fundamental pattern is to vault credentials and require that people, when they need to take action with extraordinary permissions, visit a vault and check out a credential so that they can authenticate into a system using that credential and have these elevated permissions. And one of the unfortunate aspects of that model is that even while that account is unused and the credential is sitting in the vault, the permissions are nevertheless present on the account. And if an attacker is able to take over the account, even using a method that didn't require the password, but if they can operate in the context of that identity, that account, then they don't need to get into the vault to check out the password. And that's a fundamental problem that Microsoft has long recognized, and that motivates Microsoft to think about this problem differently. Instead of vaulting a credential and obligating somebody to take certain steps before they can use that account, Microsoft's fundamental pattern is only award extraordinary permissions to an account at the moment they are needed. So instead of the PAM acronym, Microsoft talks about PIM to distinguish it in a stark way, privileged identity management. And instead of vaulting a credential and making people undertake a process to get the credential, Microsoft only awards the permissions that are going to be used at the moment they're needed, and then they're taken away. So there's still an obligation on the user, the administrator who wants to do extraordinarily high permission work, to go undertake a process to request the elevated permissions. And in the PIM environment, that request can be automatically approved, so that the request is really serving as only evidence and a record that a person elevated to take some action. And in that request process, it can be auto-approved, and we can obligate the user to put in a reason, things like that. And how long are they going to need those permissions? So that's the fundamental design of the Microsoft Entra ID privileged identity management capability. Now, this is a P2 feature in the Microsoft licensing realm. And even if your organization is not prepared to pay for the P2 feature for everyone on your network, a lot of organizations pay for the P2 feature for this PIM capability for the small set of users that are going to use extraordinary permissions, like the global administrators or the authentication management methods administrators in their Azure tenants. What is new and changes this PIM, because the PIM has been around for a number of years, and it was somewhat restricted to cloud-based permissions. It didn't work particularly well or at all for things like on-prem permissions or permissions in a non-Microsoft system, where our ability to reach into that system and award a permission, an elevated permission, in a just-in-time manner and take it away after it's been used and the period in which it was going to be available has expired. What's changed now is Entra ID has introduced a feature called PIM for groups. So instead of just the PIM for the directory roles like global administrator, or PIM for the RBAC roles that are part of the Azure resource, the infrastructure side of Azure, all those things are still there. We can do just in time, just enough elevation, time limited elevation for all of the cloud roles. But we're now able to configure a group to support a PIM process to add someone to the group where that group will have extraordinary rights anywhere, somewhere. And the act of elevating into the PIM for groups can cause the system to execute a transaction that goes through that skim method that's part of provisioning and deprovisioning and reach out to another system and award or remove permissions in a just-in-time, just-enough manner. So, the model that they've long had in the cloud where we elevate to the RBAC roles that are part of the cloud, with this PIM for groups, we can now elevate to anything. There's still the work of doing the integration, developing that coded process that's going to reach out to some foreign system and elevate and take it away. But that's part of the overall platform. So when you buy into the Microsoft Entra ID platform, you're getting features around identity governance administration, entitlement management, access requests, approvals, access reviews. You're getting all the benefits of access management, SSO, and conditional access controls that say, hey, you can only reach this application if you're performed an MFA and you're on a compliant device and you're on a trusted network. We can now apply all of that to privileged identity management, where we can say, in order for you to elevate into this group and perform work with extraordinary permissions in some target environment, you must SSO with a strong auth on a compliant device from a trusted network. And we're only going to add the permissions to the credential, to the user account, at the moment you've gone through the workflow and been approved for this extraordinary permission. And then we're going to take it away in an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever we configured it to be. So this is a pretty good story. It certainly doesn't fully replace all the capabilities of a tool like CyberArk, but it goes a long way. And in an awful lot of organizations, this will be a much easier, reduced friction way of working. When it's a fit, it's a very good technology to solve these problems. Over to the right, which is probably a little bit too hard to read, but I'll zoom in. And this is on a Microsoft, public website. But these are the licensing models for the Entra ID features. So we've got all these features and what's available depending on what level of licensing you're bringing to the table. And I wanted to zoom in here on, the PIM feature is part of the P2. PIM for groups is part of P2. PIM with conditional access controls is part of P2. There is a new feature that is access reviews on PIM for groups. And to get that feature, you've got to, buy into the Entra ID Governance licensing SKU. And again, I don't want to minimize the amount of effort required to integrate the PIM system with non-Microsoft systems, applications, and services. There's work to do there, but it's not materially different than some of the work that's done when you bring some of the CyberArk technology to this, to attempt to adopt the same model, like automatic password rotation in target systems and services. Those use cases are likely to still exist, but more and more, if you're adopting Microsoft's best practices, you won't have any passwords in these environments. And workloads that are done traditionally by user objects with passwords, more and more will be done with workload identities where the platform itself manages the secrets and rotates the secrets and the key pairs. So if you've not, fully bought into a PIM product, or if you're struggling with how to meet your compliance obligations in the category of privileged access, there's real opportunity in the Microsoft PIM technology to solve these problems in a very effective way, and I would argue in a relatively easy way in many, many cases. So we've talked about privileged identity management and how it works and Microsoft's philosophy behind it. Now I'm going to take a little bit of time and demonstrate where do we go in the management portals to take advantage of this just-in-time, just-enough set of capabilities. So there are two major places in the management interface where we're going to deal with PIM-related activity. Within the user's blade of the Entra portal, I can take a user, and when I look at them, I will see their assigned roles. And here we have different kinds of assignments. I have eligible assignments, active assignments, and expired assignments. So when I make an assignment, I can say, let's make this active immediately. I can also mark it as permanent, meaning that's not the best practice. And as you see in my sandbox environment, my admin account has many permanent, highly privileged roles, including things like global administrator. In a production tenant where real activity is happening, this is a terrible thing to do. Okay? What I want is especially high value roles. I want those to be assignments that are marked as eligible. Now, I don't have any, but let's make one. So what does it mean? I'm going to say that this user should have the ability to elevate to a set of permissions defined by a role. And I can say, well, what role do I want this person to have? And this is an ever-growing list of pre-built roles. So there are all these collections of permissions that Microsoft has deemed important that are under their control. I'll show you in a little bit a place where we can go define our own custom roles that are tailored to a specific set of responsibilities we might have and want to assign to people. But let's just pick one of these. I'm going to say, I'm going to make the admin account eligible to be the Azure DevOps Administrator role. The scope is going to be to the entire directory. We'll talk about scope in a little bit different context in a little bit. So I've identified the user. I started by focusing on my user, and I'm assigning an eligible role. And instead of making it active immediately, I'm simply satisfied to make this person eligible to elevate. And I can take the default, which is they're eligible without an end date. Or I could say, I'm going to future date a moment at which they become eligible, and I'm going to expire it. I'm going to take it away automatically. They don't need this except for a few days, perhaps. Okay, but let's keep it simple. I'm going to make this user permanently eligible for the Azure DevOps Administrator role. So now I'm assigning that role to that user. If I refresh, I see it now under the eligible. Doesn't show up as active, but it's eligible. Now, what does that mean? It means that this user, should they reach a point where they need to take advantage of the permissions that are assigned to someone with the role of Azure DevOps Administrator, they need to take action to elevate. Okay, where is that done? Well, that's done in the Privileged Identity Management interface on the Azure portal. Okay, so if I go to the home here, this is my admin account logged in just to portal.azure.com. And if I looked for resources, I see Entra Privileged Identity Management. And that's how I reach this interface. Now, this shows me my roles, just like that other screen, my active, my eligible. So at this point, I have assigned the admin account to be eligible for the Azure DevOps Administrator role. If I navigate in another tab here, I'm going to the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. And you see here, I've got Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. If it wasn't in my frequently or recently used list, I could search for Privileged Identity Management among all the services, and I'm going to choose Privileged Identity Management. So in this portal, I am able to look at my eligible assignments, and I can say, I want to activate and I need it for tricky looking around my camera. Let's say I only need to do this for 4 hours. So we've got a lot of organizations that prescribe requirements about what should go in the justification field, often citing a ticket number in their help desk environment. So that illustrates that I can get this kind of record keeping just by mandating that somebody does that. Okay. So behind the scenes, the workflow is firing to make that assignment live on my network. And so now I've got, this is now activated. It's not assigned, it's activated. And it's going to end in 4 hours. But now my account, the account I'm operating under, because that's the one I logged into and said I want to activate the role for which I'm eligible. So now when I were to go navigate into the DevOps environment, I have the role and the needed permission to do things that only an Azure DevOps administrator would be able to do. Okay, so what I just walked through shows how this process works for the Microsoft Entra roles. And you saw on that list, there's well over 100 of those. and I can extend that list with my own custom roles. But I also want to illustrate that there are groups. Now, in this case, I've got a group that the account I'm logged in is a member. And in this case, it was permanently assigned. But this represents PIM for groups. I can define new groups, mark them as subject to the PIM for groups capabilities. And when I do that, they would appear under the groups where I'm then able to activate that role associated with the group. And this is where some of the real power of this model comes from, because independent of PIM, I can arrange for membership in a group or a group membership change to trigger provisioning activity in the entitlement management and app registration system. So the act of activating, putting me in the group, can cause a skim message to go out. And if I need to take action in some legacy system that maybe is on-prem, then that skim message can be handled by the ECMA host model that we talked about in the provisioning topic, where I can reach out and take action in an external environment or system. So this just in time, just enough concept of eligible, self-activate, I haven't demoed. I can put a approval step. Here I've only configured one that was eligible and self-activated, but I can also mandate that someone else approve the ability to elevate. And I can do it for the built-in roles, for custom roles, for groups that are marked as eligible to be part of the PIM system. I must make that declaration on the group when I create the group. I can't later come back and change the characteristic of the group to make it eligible. That's a capability that must be part of the group creation process. And then finally, the Azure roles. Okay. Now, I'm logged in as admin. Ordinary users wouldn't see the manage part, but I am able to manage the Azure roles, the Entra ID roles. So here's the pick list that you saw. Nearly all of these are the built-in, although a couple of them in this list are custom. Okay. Because I'm an admin of PIM, I get to see the assignments of these roles. And again, this is a sandbox tenant. There's really nothing interesting going on other than just wanted to illustrate that this kind of data is all tracked, recorded, and available in the portal and through the graph. Okay. And we can do access reviews. Okay. So I hope I've explained it clearly enough. The fundamental idea behind PIM is a just in time, just enough, limited elevation of permission. And because not all of those 100 roles are of equal value, the system's quite flexible. Some of those roles probably makes perfect sense to make them permanently active and unlimited in duration. But for highly privileged roles, best practice is no, only make someone eligible, require that they go through a process and record a justification for when they elevate, and make it so that that is removed after some fixed period of time. So we've got the just in time, just enough. We can apply it to the built-in roles that are part of the Entra ID directory environment. We can apply it to the Azure roles that represent permissions in the infrastructure side of Azure. And significantly, we can now apply it to groups that are identified as eligible for PIM for groups at the moment the group is created. And that's the part that brings great power, in the sense that we can reach out to non-Microsoft systems and take action when someone is added to that group or removed. So I hope that was clear, but thank you for your attention.